And we're going to do that from CNN headquarters, beginning with the headlines. A car bomb exploded outside an Iraqi army recruitment center today, killing at least 35 people and wounding 145 others. Iraqi interim Prime Minister Iyad Allawi visited the scene of the Baghdad blast, calling it a cowardly attack. U.S. military officials say the casualties were innocent bystanders. President Bush is meeting with his cabinet in just a few minutes. Then, after a lunchtime speech to an independent business group, the president returns to the campaign trail. He'll travel to the battleground state of Washington for a fundraiser for GOP Senate candidate George Nethercutt. How safe are drugs bought on the internet? A Senate panel tries to answer that question today. Among those testifying, former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani and a woman whose husband died after buying illegal prescription drugs on the web. And fans of Ray Charles can pay their respects in Los Angeles today. There's going to be a public viewing of the body. People can also sign a book of condolences. The singer died 1 week ago from acute liver disease.
Oh, beautiful.
And we get back to the final public hearing of the 9/11 Commission. It is underway in Washington, with audio tape providing a haunting glimpse aboard one of the doomed airliners. What you're about to hear is one of the hijackers, believed to be alleged ringleader Mohammed Atta, speaking to the passengers.
At 8:34, the Boston Center controller received the third transmission from American 11.
By the move speed, going back to the airport, don't try to make any stupid moves.
Our Sean Calebs is in our Washington bureau and joins us with the latest on the dramatic testimony that we were listening to earlier today. Sean, good morning.
Good day to you, Darren. Indeed, this last day of the public hearings provide a sobering look at the confusion and miscommunication affecting the military and the Federal Aviation Administration on September 11th. The testimony providing a timeline after the first aircraft, American Flight 11, was hijacked until the crash of United Airlines Flight 93 in a field in Pennsylvania more than an hour later. This, of course, after passengers fought with the hijackers. For many who lost loved ones in the attacks, the testimony was emotional. The report was interspersed with tape recordings from the aircraft, including this exchange that came from Flight 93, believed to be that of hijacker Zayed Jarrah, shortly after the terrorists seized the cockpit.
Between 9:34 and 9:38, the controller observed United 93 climbing to 40,700 feet and immediately moved several aircraft out of its way. The controller continued to try to contact United 93 and asked whether the pilot could confirm that he had been hijacked. There was no response. Then at 9:39, a fifth radio transmission came over the radio frequency from United 93.
Hi, this is the captain. I would like to remain seated. We're all aboard and are going to back to the airport, and we have our demand to please remain quiet.
The controller responded, quote, United 93, understand you have a bomb on board. Go ahead, end quote. The flight did not respond.
Aside from audio of the hijackers, the presentation also detailed the crooked flight paths like this one, Flight 11, after taking off from Boston, following it all the way to the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. The report said emergency measures in the United States were simply inadequate. The defense plans at the time were geared toward a traditional hijacking or a Cold War scenario, rather than terrorists taking a plane and turning it into a missile.
9/11. The existing protocol was unsuited in every respect for what was about to happen. What ensued was the hurried attempt to create an improvised defense by officials who had never encountered or trained against the situation they faced.
The FAA and military leaders struggled to respond to the series of hijackings. President Bush was in Florida, speaking at a grade school. After the second plane hit the World Trade Center and another hit the Pentagon, Mr. Bush then called Vice President Dick Cheney, saying, and we quote here, "Sounds like we have a minor war going on here. I heard about the Pentagon. We're at war. Somebody's going to pay." Critically important time ticked away while officials debated how to scramble military aircraft and make the agonizing decision to possibly shoot down a commercial aircraft if it appeared headed toward the White House or another target.
The Vice President said there's been at least 3 instances here where we've had reports of aircraft approaching Washington. A couple were confirmed hijack, and pursuant to the President's instructions, I gave authorization for them to be taken out. Hello? Secretary of Defense. Yes, I understand. Who did you give that direction to? The Vice President. It was passed from here through the Operations Center at the White House from the shelter. Secretary of Defense. Okay, let me ask the question here. Has that directive been transmitted to the aircraft? Vice President, yes, it has. Secretary of Defense. So we've got a couple of aircraft up there that have those instructions at the present time? The Vice President, that is correct. And it's my understanding they've already taken a couple of aircraft out. Secretary of Defense, we can't confirm that. We're told that one aircraft is down, but we do not have a pilot report that they did it.
Just some of the confusion going on that day. And finally, Darren, this statement from the report, and we quote here, NORAD officials, of course the North American Defense Command, have maintained that they would have intercepted and shot down 93. We are not so sure, the report says. We are sure that the nation owes a debt to the passengers of United 93. Their actions saved the lives of countless others and may have saved either the U.S. Capitol or the White House from destruction. Darren?
Well, and that we knew even before today's hearings, which do go on at this hour. Sean Caleb's in D.C. We'll be back to you. Thank you for that. And now to the war on terror. Pakistan's army this hour, a chilling behind-the-scenes look at the response to the September 11th terrorist attacks. Today's 9/11 Commission hearing focused on how aviation and military officials reacted. The panel says the military response was too late to stop the attacks. The report also chronicles the confusion and delays as officials tried to sort out what was happening. Iraq's interim president calls it a cowardly attack. At least 35 people were killed when a car bomb exploded outside an army recruiting station in Baghdad today. Authorities say the victims were innocent civilians. There were no reports of U.S. or Iraqi army casualties. Pentagon officials say Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld ordered the secret detention of an Iraqi prisoner at the CIA's request. The detainee was considered a high-value prisoner with information about military operations against U.S. forces. Officials say his secret status was designed to protect U.S. troops, not to hide the detainee from the Red Cross. Friends of an American being held hostage in Saudi Arabia plan to hold a candlelight vigil tonight. Paul Johnson's captors have threatened to kill him unless Saudi authorities release Al-Qaeda prisoners by tomorrow. In a CNN interview, Johnson's son and sister made an emotional appeal for his release. It is 11 a.m. on the East Coast, 8 a.m. for those of you on the West Coast from the CNN Center here in Atlanta. Good morning once again. I'm Darren Kagan. Up first on CNN, investigating the September 11th attacks. The final public hearing of the 9/11 Commission is underway in Washington. And for the first time, the public has heard audio tapes of what happened aboard the airliners and among officials on the ground. Let's listen.
Controllers immediately began to move aircraft out of its path and searched from aircraft to aircraft in an effort to have another pilot contact American 11. At 8:24 and 38 seconds, the following transmission came from American 11.
We have some planes. Just stay quiet and you'll be okay. We're returning to the airport.
The controller only heard something unintelligible. He did not hear the specific words, quote, "We have some planes," end quote. The next transmission came seconds later.
Nobody move. Everything will be okay. If you try to make any move, you'll endanger yourself and the airplane. Just stay quiet.
Hearing that transmission, the controller told us he then knew it was a hijacking.
34 and 9:38, the controller observed United 93 climbing to 40,700 feet and immediately moved several aircraft out of its way. The controller continued to try to contact United 93 and asked whether the pilot could confirm that he had been hijacked. There was no response. Then at 9:39, a fifth radio transmission came over the radio frequency from United 93.
Hi, this is the captain. I would like to remain seated. We're all aboard and are going to back to the airport and we have our demand, so please remain quiet.
The controller responded, quote, "United 93, understand you have a bomb on board. Go ahead," end quote. The flight did not respond.
For more on the important news unfolding at the commission hearings this morning, we have our Sean Caleb's. Sean, the latest testimony from General Myers came from General Myers. What did he have to say?
In short, he said basically we chased a lot of phantoms that day, basically saying that the military, indeed the United States, was totally unprepared to handle a terrorist attack like this. That the defenses in the United States had been set up to handle a traditional hijacking, one that played out over a period of time and gave authorities a certain degree of options, or perhaps a holdover from the Cold War, when the major concern was, of course, an aircraft or something coming from the Soviet Union. Basically, that the United States was simply unsuited to deal with the terrorist attacks that ended that devastating day.
Another thing we were able to hear this morning as we listened in, there was a staff statement where they gave a timeline of events as they think they unfolded on 9/11. Well, of course, we don't have time to go through the entire timeline, but some of the highlights that you heard, please.
Well, chiefly, it was just the confusion that the FAA as well as air traffic controllers went through that day from the time the first plane that would be hijacked took off from Logan Airport until Flight 93 crashed in the field in Pennsylvania. There was a lot of confusion indeed. At one point, one air traffic controller was responsible for handling 2 of the hijacked aircraft at one time. While it was focused on Flight 11, Flight 175 was also in its area at that time, and basically it was simply off of their screens. They couldn't focus attention on it. And when the regional controllers tried to call the national controllers, they said, we don't have time to deal with this right now. We're focused on a hijacking. So there was just a lot of confusion that day.
Right, and of course it's going to talk about a lot that went wrong because so much did go wrong on 9/11. But one thing it does not question, in fact it backs up, is the heroics of those people who were on board United Airlines Flight 93, the one that ended up crashing in Pennsylvania.
Exactly, and before it gets to that, it also details a sequence where President Bush phoned Vice President Dick Cheney, passing on the authority to shoot down a commercial aircraft if it appeared to be hostile, threatening the U.S. Capitol, the White House, or something. And apparently Dick Cheney did pass that on, but by that time Flight 93 had crashed. And Darren, quickly, I want to read you the next to last paragraph in the statement earlier this morning. It said, NORAD officials have maintained they would have intercepted and shot down United 93. The report says we are not so sure. We are sure, however, the nation owes a debt to the passengers of United 93. Their actions saved the lives of countless others and may have saved either the U.S. Capitol or the White House from destruction.
Sean Caleb's in Washington, D.C. Sean, thank you.
Thanks very much. Unfolding this hour, we're following several important stories, including the attacks of 9/11, the chilling, never-before-heard audio tapes featuring the voice of one of the hijackers, and the miscommunication and confusion that hampered the United States military's response. We're live with all of today's dramatic developments. In Baghdad, another deadly car bombing. Iraqis were once again targeted. And from New Jersey, the agonizing wait for the family of American Paul Johnson. His captors threatening to murder him, literally, within hours. We begin with the 9/11 Commission and its conclusion of its public hearings, awash in drama today. We've heard chilling audio tapes of the hijackers' voices communicating with passengers. And we've seen how the plot has unfolded so quickly. That heroic efforts by U.S. government workers were plagued by confusion and doomed to failure because planners literally never prepared for hijacked airliners that could be used on suicide missions. With the story, all the details, our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr, she's joining us live. Barbara?
Indeed, Wolf, stunning testimony, even for those of us who have followed this story for the last 2.5 years. Stunning testimony on the last day of public hearings for the independent commission investigating the 9/11 attacks. The commission staff now painfully reconstructing the flight paths of all 4 hijacked planes, detailing problems, confusion, missed signals, missed opportunities with the FAA and the United States military on that morning. But as you say, it was the bone-chilling recording from the cockpit of American Airlines Flight 11, a voice from the cockpit that the commission believes is Mohammed Atta. The first time we have heard him, one of the mastermind hijackers. He speaks from the cockpit.
At 8:34, the Boston Center controller received the 3rd transmission from American 11.
Everybody move, please. We're going back to the airport. Don't try to make any stupid moves.
That, again, being the voice of the man they believe was Mohammed Atta. After that testimony, there was then testimony from top U.S. military commanders, General Ralph Eberhart, of NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, the man responsible for the military defense of the United States, the skies over America on that day. Now, he detailed why it was that the planes could not catch up to the hijackers, but then, of course, he was asked, how could they do today with some of the improvements that have been made?
Given the situation that you've outlined, which we think is a situation that exists today because of the fixes, the remedies put in place, we would be able to shoot down all 3 aircraft, all 4 aircraft.
Now, General Eberhart, however, goes on, Wolf, to explain just how much the military was out of the right place to be on that morning. Just one example that he goes through on American Airlines Flight 11. He says that on September 11th, there was 6 minutes available to try and stop that plane if they'd been able to launch aircraft, if they'd known where to look for it, if they could have gotten up in the air more quickly. Just 6 minutes. But with the improvements today, the better communications between the FAA and NORAD, the earlier warning if there is a problem, he said there would be 17 minutes. On September 11th, the jets, the fighter jets, were 153 miles away from that airliner when it hit the World Trade Towers. Today, he said, with the improvements, U.S. military fighter jets would have been in position to fire and shoot down the plane for the final 8 minutes of the flight. But to be clear, General Eberhart said it's a worst-case scenario if they have to call in the military for a hijacking, for a shoot-down, because, of course, in that instance, everybody on board the civilian airliner dies. That is not the solution that the U.S. military wants. General Eberhart very strongly endorsing the war on terrorism, getting the terrorists where they are, and the improved airline security in the United States since 9/11. Wolf.
Barbara, did either General Eberhart or General Richard Myers, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, explain why the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. military, had never even trained for the possibility of a hijacked airliner being used on a suicide mission, despite several intelligence warnings in the decade that preceded 9/11 that terrorists might use a hijacked plane to go into a big building?
Not a good explanation, Wolf. What they are saying here at the Pentagon and at NORAD is that they were still somewhat in a Cold War posture, that NORAD was always looking outwards beyond the shorelines of the United States. In fact, on that day, one of the pilots flying Air Patrol thought that it was a cruise missile attack from an enemy abroad. No concept in their mind. They readily admit that airplanes could be used as suicide bombers, but one of the commissioners pointing out that that might not be a good enough explanation because, of course, for decades, NORAD had the specific responsibility of the air defense of the United States, defending the skies over America, no matter what the threat would be. So the question persists, if the intelligence was out there, did the military know about it? Did the FAA know about it? And did they think quickly enough about how to position themselves and how to modernize? One of the things that all of the witnesses have said is there was not good communication between NORAD and the FAA on that day, not good communication either on phone line or between their radar systems. Lots of problems, lots of things they've tried to fix since then. But clearly, looking backward with 20/20 hindsight, an awful lot of problems emerged that morning.
Barbara Starr at the Pentagon. Thanks, Barbara, very much. Let's get a little bit more analysis now on what exactly we've learned today. For that, we turn to our military analyst, retired U.S. Air Force Major General Don Shepard. General, thanks very much for joining us. Do you have a good explanation why the U.S. Air Force never trained for that contingency?
Yeah, absolutely. We were asleep, Wolf. Pure and simple. America was asleep. The military was asleep on this scenario. Nobody envisioned it or thought about it. We knew how to intercept hijacked airplanes. We had procedures for doing that. But the idea was to intercept them and trail them and watch what happened. Nobody envisioned this, despite the intelligence warning that Barbara talked about. The military was asleep. FAA was asleep. Congress was asleep. None of us were on top of this.
Because in the earlier reports, the findings from this 9/11 Commission, they document I don't remember how many times, but several times, that there were suggestions out there that terrorists would try to hijack a plane, go into the Shalom Towers, for example, in Tel Aviv, which is the tallest building in Israel. There were suggestions they wanted to go to the Eiffel Tower in Paris. There were all sorts of threats that were out there about using planes as suicide bombs, if you will. Yet, for some strange reason, the U.S. military never prepared for that.
Hindsight. In other words, all of these reports, as we've seen throughout this 9/11 hearing and other hearings, all of these reports never got through the various bureaucracies and the channels that we have in intelligence communication to the military to say we need to be preparing for that. At the time of 9/11, we had 7 alert sites covering the entire United States, 14 airplanes. We had 4 dedicated air defense sites in America because we had come down on air defense. We thought there was no air defense threat to America, and nobody envisioned this despite the warnings out there.
One of the most chilling reports from the findings of today was one of the staffers reading from this document, from this conclusion, when he refers to pilots from Langley Air Force Base, U.S. Air Force pilots flying, I believe, F-16s, who were told nothing about what they were doing. They just said scramble, and they assumed that the Russians had launched a cruise missile against the United States, an old Cold War scenario for which they had been trained many years earlier.
Yeah, here's what happens. Basically, you're sitting on alert, and you're told to scramble. The horn goes off, you go out, you scramble. A lot of information is not going to be passed. They're going to vector you to intercept your target, and they're going to tell you what to do with that target, but they're not going to provide you with all the information. So in your mind is what the heck has happened, what's going on. You're not going to have the big picture. You're going to be dedicated to the mission you're on at that time, which is the airplane, told whether or not to shoot it down.
And if you're a pilot of an F-16 or an F-15 and you're ordered to shoot down a commercial airliner, knowing that there are civilians inside, that's not an order you can simply obey. Somebody saying to you, shoot it down right now. You need instructions. You want to make sure the President of the United States or the Secretary of Defense supports this.
And now those procedures are in place. They were not on that day. Nobody had ever gone through this. Now, in talking to the pilots that were on those missions after this, basically they said, yes, had they been issued the orders, they would have done it, but it would have been a drastic maneuver on their part, something they had never thought about and something they had done on the spot. They're trained to do it now, Wolf, when the procedures are in place.
So these active duty pilots who fly these so-called CAPs, these combat air patrols over in New York or Washington or LA or Las Vegas or whatever, they're either active duty or they're reservists. They are now trained, is that what you're saying, to shoot down a commercial airliner if necessary?
Yes. At the time, basically all air defense was provided by the Air National Guard. Now, at the present time, it's a mixture out there, and they can be expanded rapidly. And they are trained. They have gone through this scenario. They're trained. They know how to get the order, and they know how to do it. They also knew how to pull the trigger at that time. It's just that nobody had ever thought through the entire scenario. Now they have.
What a nightmare scenario that must be for a pilot.
Not only nightmare, it's not the way to go. As General Eberhart testified today, and as we all know, the answer for safety is not to put airplanes up with missiles to shoot down airliners. It's to provide airline security before the people get on and to go after the terrorists where they are.
General Shepard, thanks very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
President Bush has asserted once again today that Saddam Hussein's Iraq did in fact establish a relationship with Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda. That puts him seemingly at odds with the 9/11 Commission, which only yesterday reported that Iraq and Al-Qaeda may have felt each other out, but never actually collaborated in attacks against the United States. For more on this, we go to the White House. CNN's Kathleen Koch standing by. The president spoke at a cabinet meeting, Kathleen.
Yes, and Wolf, the president was in react mode for the second day in a row, really insisting, defending his administration's ongoing insistence that the Saddam Hussein regime didn't have well-known and long-established ties to terrorist organizations, including Al-Qaeda. And as you pointed out, it was just yesterday that the 9/11 Commission said that it could find no, quote, collaborative relationship between the two, and that it also could find no evidence whatsoever that Iraq and Al-Qaeda cooperated in the 9/11 attacks. But in the cabinet meeting this morning, the president took some questions from reporters, and he insisted that that finding, though, is not inconsistent with what his administration has been saying.
Oh, the reason I keep insisting that there was a relationship between Iraq and Saddam and Al-Qaeda, because there was a relationship between Iraq and Al-Qaeda. This administration never said that the 9/11 attacks were orchestrated between Saddam and Al-Qaeda. We did say there were numerous contacts between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. For example, Iraqi intelligence officers met with bin Laden, the head of Al-Qaeda in the Sudan.
The president was also asked by reporters about a November order given by Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld to hide a detainee in Iraq from the Red Cross for some 7 months, that an apparent violation of international law. President Bush said that he and the secretary discussed that incident for the very first time this morning, and the president was very supportive, saying that Secretary Rumsfeld is doing a fabulous job and that he's never disappointed in his defense secretary. The president did point out that Rumsfeld is having a press conference today to discuss the incident, and also the president's spokesman, Scott McClellan, elaborated somewhat, insisting that the Bush administration does believe it is very important to work closely and cooperatively with the Red Cross on detainee issues. Wolf.
CNN's Kathleen Koch at the White House. Kathleen, thanks very much. And CNN, of course, will have coverage of Donald Rumsfeld's news conference. That comes up 2:30 p.m. Eastern today. Let's move on to Iraq now, where another deadly car bombing in Baghdad has left dozens dead, many more wounded. And with the handover just 13 days away, there's fear yet more Iraqis will in fact be targeted. Our chief international correspondent, Christiane Amanpour, joining us. Welcome back. Let's get back to our top story, investigating the 9/11 attacks. The final public hearing on the 9/11 Commission is about to conclude here in Washington. And for the first time, we are now hearing audio tapes of what happened aboard the airliners and among officials on the ground.
On the morning of 9/11, the existing protocol was unsuited in every respect for what was about to happen. What ensued was the hurried attempt to create an improvised defense by officials who had never encountered or trained against the situation they faced.
At 8:24 and 38 seconds, the following transmission came from American 11.
We have some planes. Just stay quiet and you'll be okay. We're returning to the airport.
The controller only heard something unintelligible. He did not hear the specific words, quote, "We have some planes," end quote. The next transmission came seconds later.
Nobody move. Everything will be okay. If you try to make any move, you'll danger yourself and the airplane. Just stay quiet.
Hearing that transmission, the controller told us he then knew it was a hijacking. At 8:34, the Boston Center controller received the third transmission from American 11.
Nobody move, please. We're going back to the airport. Don't try to make any stupid moves.
The controller continued to try to contact United 93 and asked whether the pilot could confirm that he had been hijacked. There was no response. Then at 9:39, a fifth radio transmission came over the radio frequency from United 93.
Very chilling audio tapes from the hijackers on 9/11. Joining us now to discuss this explosive issue as well as the overall situation in Iraq, two guests. Peter Beinart is the editor of The New Republic. Cliff May is the president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. I think, Peter, you have to admit, when you hear these audio tapes, you hear what we believe to be the voice of Mohammed Atta or Zia Jarrah, some of the hijackers. You have to conclude that, I mean, it just brings back horrible memories for all of us.
No, it really does, and also a sense of rage. I mean, that people would do this to us, and I think the only one has to try to move beyond, just as we did after September 11th, the incredible grief and pain, to a strategy for how to stop these people so it never happens again.
Is there a strategy in place right now to do this, to stop these people from doing it again?
There's the beginning of one. Understand that we didn't have a strategy for terrorism for a very long time. What we had was the belief that if we had an army and an intelligence service that could take on the Soviet Union, the small countries obviously would not be a problem. If we could deal with China, we didn't have to worry about Afghanistan. That was the wrong strategy. It was the strategy in place for more than a generation. I don't know that we have the best policies in place right now. We need to evolve the best policies, and that means we need to look forward rather than continually look back and say, okay, exactly who's to blame for this one?
Well, before we look forward, let's look back a little bit. Cliff makes a very important point, and I want to get your sense. Is it true that in the 80s and the 90s, the period of the Reagan administration, the first Bush administration, and the 8 years of the Clinton administration, they were asleep. They really had no strategy in fighting terrorism.
Yes, relative to what they should have been doing to where we are now, they were asleep. There's no question about it. You know, none of us, I think we should say, very, very few people out there in the 80s or 90s were saying this should be the top American foreign policy priority. But in retrospect, it should have been a much higher priority than it was, and we are paying the price for that inaction.
Can I point out, just for example, in the 1990s, we now know that 20,000 terrorists were trained in lethal skills in Afghan training camps. Now, we did nothing to close those camps, to infiltrate them, or track those who graduated, but it goes back further. Keep in mind that in the late 1970s, President Carter dismissed 25% of our intelligence agents, including most of those trained in the most lethal things.
You know,
and assassinations were ruled out.
I just want to make a point here. What's interesting is that the partisan tinge this takes. You notice the 90s and the 70s. In all of the discussion of Ronald Reagan's legacy,
I'm sorry.
How many stories did you read about his abysmal record on terrorism? His weakness in the face of terrorism, which was just as bad as President Clinton's, probably worse. Very little from the right side of the aisle.
Let me just be clear, because I've written about this, and I have written about this, I think, in a fair way. This goes back to 79. I mentioned particularly the hijacking of our embassy and some of Carter's policies. In 1982, our embassy was attacked by Hezbollah in Beirut under Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan made exactly the wrong decision. He pulled out of Beirut, which sent yet another signal to the terrorists that if you hit us, we will flee. This, I will say, let me say to you.
Has been about that?
I'm going to say it once and say it as clearly as I can. Republicans and Democrats for more than a generation in the White House and in Congress have not understood the threat of terrorism. They have instead had a bipartisan policy, and that policy was focused on Russia and China and what were called the lesser includeds they didn't worry about.
I think that's a good important clarification, because you did refer to the Clinton administration, the Carter administration, but you neglected the 12 years of Republican administrations involving Reagan and the first Bush.
And the first Bush. It was also a mistake, and it wasn't only Bush's fault, but it was partly his fault. In 1991, we said the fact that Saddam Hussein had tried to destroy a fellow neighboring country, had engaged in genocide, had created weapons of mass destruction, we're not going to evict him from his palaces. It's not a serious enough crime. Terrible mistake. I wish Bush had said, I don't care who advises me, this is the decision I'm making.
And you will agree with Peter, and I'm sure you will, that the failure of Ronald Reagan to respond to the killing of 241 Marines at the U.S. barracks outside of Beirut in 1983, the failure to go after Hezbollah or Iranian-sponsored terrorists, that was a huge mistake with hindsight.
It was a huge mistake, and we never followed up properly even with the investigation of what happened in Beirut. The only one punished for what happened in Beirut was Keith Hall, a CIA agent. You know what he was punished for? Being too tough in his interrogations. And we're getting into an interesting discussion of them now. What did he do? As far as we know, he pushed a suspect off his chair to show he meant business. And we didn't pursue it. He was fired. Nobody else was punished for what happened in Beirut in 1982.
One of the most shocking things we learned today, and I was shocked, and I've been watching this story for many, many years, for decades, going back to long before I was a Pentagon correspondent. The U.S. military, the U.S. Air Force, had never trained for the possibility that an airliner, a civilian airliner, could be hijacked and used as a bomb by suicide hijackers. That's shocking to me. I don't know about you, Peter.
Well, in retrospect, obviously hindsight is 20/20, but we do know that there was a plot in Malaysia to blow up airplanes.
Well, that's what I mean. There were so many signals in the 80s and 90s that this was a potential weapon out there to hijack a plane and use it as a missile.
That's right. Look, sadly, the history of this country, and I think the history of democracies in general, is that they tend not to get on the war footing they need to get to until after something terrible happens. It would be wonderful if it wasn't the case, but it usually is. Luckily, in our history, we have been able to respond to these things by getting it right the second and the third time. That's what we have to do now.
Despite what we knew about 1995, remember back what it was like going through an airport in the late 1990s, and I don't say that in the early after 2002. Sure. People said, did you pack your own luggage? Did anybody assist you? That was considered to be airline security. It was ridiculous. And you're right, we have to get on a substantial war footing, but part of my argument now would be, are we sure we're doing it now? Do we understand the magnitude of the threat that's out there, what they seek to do against us, and are we doing enough? Democrats and Republicans alike, are we doing enough to fight this war? And it's a global war against terrorism.
Let's move on and talk about an issue that's out there right now, the connection or lack thereof between Saddam Hussein's Iraq and Al-Qaeda. The president was asked once again to respond on this issue earlier today at his cabinet meeting at the White House. Listen to what he said.
Oh, the reason I keep insisting that there was a relationship between Iraq and Saddam and Al-Qaeda, because there was a relationship between Iraq and Al-Qaeda. This administration never said that the 9/11 attacks were orchestrated between Saddam and Al-Qaeda. We did say there were numerous contacts between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. For example, Iraqi intelligence officers met with bin Laden, the head of Al-Qaeda, in the Sudan.
Is this a serious dispute between the White House and the 9/11 Commission, or are we missing something?
I think we're missing something. First of all, the president is wrong. His own vice president has implied strongly that Saddam did have a role in 9/11. That's why he made this unfounded allegation that Mohammed Atta, the lead hijacker, had met with an Iraqi agent in Prague, something which has now been discredited. I would say this. The 9/11 Commission, which seems to me the most credible source we have, has said there was no real relationship between the two.
No collaborative effort against the United States.
They say there were meetings. They say that Iraq was basically not interested in helping Al-Qaeda. But I would say this. If the bar is war here, you need more. Even if we were to concede that there were ties, there were links, you would have to say, are these ties and links greater than the links that Pakistan has, that the Sudan has, that Saudi Arabia has? Even if we were willing to concede that there were links and ties, they would be of such minimal nature compared to so many other countries that it seems to me bizarre that the focus of the war on terrorism was on Iraq.
This is what my friend Peter, I think, is contradicting himself. If we're on a war footing, it's not the same as saying, well, until we have absolute proof, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Saddam Hussein was involved in a crime against the United States, then we can't do anything. Look, in 1998, again, just making this bipartisan, the Justice Department under President Clinton said very clearly in an indictment that Al-Qaeda had made an agreement with Iraq that they would specifically including weapons to government and working cooperatively between Iraq and the government and Al-Qaeda.
But that seems to be rejected now by the 9/11 Commission.
If they reject it, if they don't say anything,
administration and not the 9/11 Commission?
I wish this 9/11 Commission would take something like that, an indictment made by the Justice Department, and discuss in there whether they think the indictment was wrong or right, instead of just leaving it out. There's a lot of work in this commission that they haven't done. Also, this mistake is being made all over the place. Having a collaborative relationship or having close links or links that we don't really understand entirely, that's different from saying they were involved in 9/11, which we don't know. Different from... By the way, Mohammed Atta, we don't know yet.
No, come on, Cliff. We know that has been rejected. It has been rejected by every serious person who's looked at it. You're still going out with that?
I'm saying we don't know. I'm saying you don't know.
We do know.
Here's the basic evidence. His cell phone was used from Florida at a time when he should have been in Prague. To my office and you make a call from it. Does that mean I was here? We don't know. Our intelligence community has not known. Look, our intelligence community still doesn't know who was responsible for the 1993 attack in the World Trade Center. Do you know? Do you know? How come we don't know? It didn't take place? Absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence.
With all respect, I think you're not paying attention to my question. My question is, there is much stronger evidence of Al-Qaeda relationships to many other governments in the world than there is to Iraq. That I think you would not dispute. So the question that there might possibly have been a tie between Iraq and Al-Qaeda does not seem to me anywhere near. We are on a war footing. We have to make choices about where the greatest threats are. Are you going to say that Al-Qaeda had a stronger relationship with Iraq than with Pakistan, with Sudan, which harbored it for years?
You were somebody who was in favor of the war against Saddam Hussein.
And still are.
You say, okay, well then don't.
But we never believed that this dishonest rationale that it was somehow connected to the war on terrorism in the sense that Al-Qaeda had strong Iraqi connections, because the evidence for that has been so weak.
No, we knew that Al-Qaeda agents and other terrorists were being trained at Salman Pak. We knew that every intelligence
agency...
That
was not in Saddam's control. Be honest about this.
Salman Pak. You're thinking of Ansar al-Islam. Salman Pak was within a half-hour drive of Baghdad.
That has been disputed, and the 9/11 Commission itself has found no evidence for this.
What does it say about Salman Pak? Finding no evidence doesn't mean there wasn't evidence.
It has gone much further than that. It has said it hasn't said we didn't find evidence. It has said, to the best of our knowledge, and they have done an exhaustive study, they have been given more documents than anybody else, we find no evidence of a collaborative relationship. You just dismiss that?
What do you do? You just dismiss Salman Pak. Well, we've had people who work there say that there were foreign jihadis who were there, they were trained, and Saddam Hussein said to them, your targets when you graduate, Americans.
And we have had the 9/11 Commission look into precisely this issue, and they have said there is no collaborative relationship.
A foreign jihadi trained in Iraq.
You don't think they looked into Salman Pak?
They didn't explain it here. You can't explain it now. I wish they would do that. I wish they would do that.
We're going to end it right now because unfortunately we're all out of time, but we'll continue this discussion. What they did say, though, in the report issued yesterday was they found no reason to believe that Mohammed Atta, the ringleader of 9/11, was in Prague and met with a senior Iraqi intelligence official. There was no evidence that they had to back that.
And that may still be in. Don't forget, the guy who's on the most wanted list right now in Iraq is who? Is Zarqawi. Zarqawi is connected to Al-Qaeda. Zarqawi was there before the liberation of Iraq. He's there now, and he's the guy we most need to get.
But the connections with Al-Qaeda, even with Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, are indirect, at least. He's not necessarily a top lieutenant to Osama bin Laden. Stand by, guys. We'll do this on another occasion. Peter Beinart, thank you very much. Cliff May, as usual, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to switch gears dramatically when we come back. In fact, we're going to go to the...
Nobody move. Everything will be okay. If you try to make any move, you'll endanger yourself and the airplane. Just stay quiet.
Voice of a terrorist in public for the first time, tapes of 9/11 hijackers from the cockpit as investigators piece together the confusion and chaos.
There was a relationship between Iraq and Al-Qaeda. This administration
Making the connection, President Bush disputes the 9/11 Commission's conclusion about Saddam Hussein.
Al-Qaeda in training, new Arab television pictures of possible exercises on the Afghan border. What does this mean for efforts to round them up?
Faith healing, medical science, making the connection between a higher power and healing power. From the CNN Center in Atlanta, I'm Kira Phillips.
And I'm Miles O'Brien. CNN's Live From starts right now. Miscommunications, misunderstandings, missed opportunities, all adding up to misery on September 11th, 2001. If you've been watching CNN, you've seen the spellbinding presentations of the 9/11 Commission investigators who have painstakingly accounted for every action and reaction on that horrible morning. The first sign of trouble came at 8:13 a.m. when American Airlines Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles, stopped responding to instructions from controllers. At 8:21, Flight 11 shut off its transponder and veered off course.
Controllers immediately began to move aircraft out of its path and searched from aircraft to aircraft in an effort to have another pilot contact American 11. At 8:24 and 38 seconds, the following transmission came from American 11.
We have some planes. Just stay quiet and you'll be okay. We're returning to the airport.
The controller only heard something unintelligible. He did not hear the specific words, quote, "We have some planes," end quote. The next transmission came seconds later.
Nobody move. Everything will be okay. If you try to make any move, you'll endanger yourself and the airplane. Just stay quiet.
Hearing that transmission, the controller told us he then knew it was a hijacking.
The voice on that recording is believed to be Mohammed Atta, the plot's ringleader, who may not have known his comments to passengers were being transmitted to the ground. Joining us now with more of the details and more of the drama, CNN's Sean Caleb's watching it all in Washington. Sean.
Indeed, Miles, you're pointing out very compelling, very riveting information coming out of this last public hearing involving the September 11th Commission. Now, went on to point out that air defense systems as well as civilian air traffic controllers were simply unprepared to deal with the events that unfolded on September 11th, that they had not in any way prepared for hijackers to take civilian aircrafts and aircraft in essence turn them into missiles, attacking both New York and Washington, D.C. NORAD going on to point out that the system struggled under difficult circumstances to improvise a homeland security defense against an unprecedented challenge that had never been encountered and they had never trained to meet. The air defense system was set up for a traditional hijacking that offered more time to perhaps deal with hijackers or a holdover from the Cold War when, of course, Miles, the chief concern was something coming from the Soviet Union.
Sean, give us a sense then, it's almost too many to name and enumerate, but how many communications lapses was the Commission able to count up?
There were many, and they stretched across all lines, from the military, NORAD defense, air traffic controllers, the FAA, all the way to the White House. At one point, an unnamed FAA official had told aircraft fighter jets to chase Flight 11. However, by that time, that plane had already slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And the military says it was never notified that Flight 175 had been hijacked. The report did go on to say that President Bush had called Vice President Cheney in a reasonable amount of time and tried to scramble fighter planes as quickly as possible to deal with this unfolding event. But by that time, the last plane, Flight 93, had already crashed into the field in Pennsylvania, of course, after passengers apparently storming the cockpit, taking on the hijackers.
But if you look at that closely, given the sequence of orders and where those fighters were from Langley Air Force Base, F-16s, if in fact 93 had continued toward Washington, very likely it would have been shot down.
Exactly. In fact, there was some confusion there. Vice President Cheney called Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, and he was updating him on the situation. And the Vice President telling the Defense Secretary that it was his understanding that fighter planes had actually shot down one, perhaps two commercial aircraft. Of course, that wasn't the case. Miles, I also think this is very important. Let me read you the next to last paragraph in the statements that came out first thing this morning. It said, and I quote here, NORAD officials maintained that they would have intercepted and shot down United 93. We are not so sure, meaning the staff report. We are sure the nation owes a debt to the passengers of United 93. Their actions saved the lives of countless others and may have saved either the U.S. Capitol or the White House from destruction.
Isn't it? Sean Calebs, thank you very much. Kira.
Did they or didn't they? Yesterday, the 9/11 panel cited no credible evidence Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein ever had the collaborative relationship that the White House cited as a key rationale for war. Today, President Bush insisted once again there was a relationship.
Oh, the reason I keep insisting that there was a relationship between Iraq and Saddam and Al-Qaeda because there was a relationship between Iraq and Al-Qaeda. This administration never said that the 9/11 attacks were orchestrated between Saddam and Al-Qaeda. We did say there were numerous contacts between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. For example, Iraqi intelligence officers met with bin Laden, the head of Al-Qaeda, in the Sudan.
The commission maintains that bin Laden asked Iraq for help, but was basically The last thing Cheryl McGinnis heard when her husband left to work on September 11th was a goodbye and a kiss as he walked out the door. Now she's listening to some of the most gripping and haunting details of that day at today's 9/11 hearing. We're talking about the tape recordings from two of the hijacked airliners. In one, hijacker Mohammed Atta is heard telling passengers to stay quiet. We are returning to the airport. Minutes later, American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the World Trade Center. Cheryl McGinnis's husband, Tom, was the co-pilot flying that aircraft. She joins us now from Manchester, New Hampshire. Cheryl, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Kara.
Well, it's sort of ironic. I know that you were just out on the patio finishing up praying, and then you got a phone call you never expected.
Yes, that's true.
Tell me what happened.
Well, I got that phone call, and I was trying to figure out what exactly happened and watching on TV as the nightmare unfolded. And later on in the morning, not too long after that, the chief pilot from American Airlines came to my house and gave me the news.
So I'm curious, were you sitting there questioning, how could this happen? This is America. Hijackings don't happen in America. And my husband was this amazing Top Gun pilot. This couldn't have happened.
Yes, I was. I was thinking this can't be Tom involved with any of this. And I never thought that my life or my children's lives would have been impacted by any of these events.
Cheryl, how did you tell your kids?
I met them at their school, and I told them that Jesus called Daddy home. And it was a very most heart-wrenching thing that I ever could do in my life. But my children knew what that meant because we have a strong faith in God.
Well, it's evident through some of the writings that you have already done, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But I'm curious to know, as you hear these recordings today, as you pay attention to the testimony and watch the hearing, what's going through your mind? Are you feeling more confusion? Are you feeling anger? Are you feeling a sense of peace?
I don't think peace is the word to describe it. It's very painful to still hear the hijacked voices from those tapes. That's very difficult to hear, and I think it always will be. That is very emotional for me and my family.
And as you listen to it and you see or you listen to more details of what happened, what's the lesson here? What's the immediate thing that's going through your mind that you hope that the military, from the White House to the military to all of us as Americans, take away from this?
You know, it's something that has happened in the past, and we need to never forget what has happened in the past, but we also need to be able to look forward with hope. And that's what I can do now with my children. And I hope that we can use the information that we are gathering, as horrible as it is at times, so that we can prevent another September 11th or any other tragedy like this from happening again. And I believe that the 9/11 Commission is doing a good job investigating so that we can keep America a safe place for not only our children, our grandchildren, and any future generation.
So tell me about Beauty Beyond the Ashes.
That is a book that I wrote, and it will be out soon, August 11th. And it is a book that is a book on encouragement. It's a book that describes how God has carried me and my family through the horror of September 11th to a new life that is unfolding each day as we move forward and live out our new lives that God has for us.
Cheryl, you talk about overcoming certain feelings of confusion, feeling alone, feeling angry. Have you overcome those feelings, or are you just learning how to cope with them?
I believe I have dealt with many of the emotions and the feelings that have been stirred up inside my heart by September 11th. From anger to fear to forgiveness, I believe that I have been dealing with all of those emotions in my heart and teaching not only myself how to deal with those, but my children as well. And we are all be able to move forward from the tragedy and from the loss of Tom and what has happened to our nation.
Cheryl, you and your kids obviously have been affected the most by this, but for us as Americans, reading your book, what can it do for me? What can it do for someone else that may not have lost a loved one, particularly a husband on 9/11, but just taking it to heart as a nation? What do you want us to walk away with from this book?
Hopefully that there's a greater understanding of the one who is ultimately in control of everything that happens. And that one that is in control can give us hope for the future. And that hope is a wonderful hope. And I have a great hope that God just loves us, and that I know that we can go forward because we'll see our loved ones again, for all who know God and love Him. And that's what my book is about. It's a book about encouragement and how to move forward after a tragedy, and how you can rise above your circumstance no matter how terrible it is and how painful it is. But there is a way to rise above your circumstance.
Well, your husband's bravery definitely lives on through your strength. Cheryl McGinnis, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Miles.
Science and faith, do they go together?
Today's hearing of the 9/11 Commission outlined in vivid detail the final moments of all 4 hijacked airplanes. The Commission used flight plans and audio transmissions to show the chain of events. Its report concludes that due to confusion and mixed signals that day, there was virtually no chance to intercept the planes. Probably the most chilling voice was believed to be suspected lead hijacker Mohammed Atta, reassuring passengers of American Airlines Flight 11. Let's listen to some of that testimony.
On the morning of 9/11, the existing protocol was unsuited in every respect for what was about to happen. What ensued was the hurried attempt to create an improvised defense by officials who had never encountered or trained against the situation they faced.
At 8:24 and 38 seconds, the following transmission came from American 11.
We have some planes. Just stay quiet and you'll be okay. We're returning to the airport.
The controller only heard something unintelligible. He did not hear the specific words, quote, "We have some planes," end quote. The next transmission came seconds later.
Nobody move. Everything will be okay. If you try to make any move, you'll danger yourself and the airplane. Just stay quiet.
Hearing that transmission, the controller told us he then knew it was a hijacking. At 8:34, the Boston Center controller received the 3rd transmission from American 11.
Nobody move, please. We're going back to the airport. Don't try to make any stupid moves.
The controller continued to try to contact United 93 and asked whether the pilot could confirm that he had been hijacked. There was no response. Then at 9:39, a 5th radio transmission came over the radio frequency from United 93.
Hi, the captain. I would like to all remain seated. We're on board and and are going to back to the airport, and we have our demand to please remain quiet.
This was the Commission's final public hearing.
Almost 3 years after the 9/11 attacks and the beginning of the war on terror, there are chilling signs that Al-Qaeda has regrouped in and around Afghanistan. CNN senior international correspondent Nick Robertson has this report.
According to Gulf broadcaster Al Jazeera, the first to receive these pictures, this is Al-Qaeda training inside Afghanistan or the nearby tribal region of Pakistan. Tests of physical fitness, including leapfrogging, reminiscent of pre-September the 11th Al-Qaeda training videos.
This material appears to be new material. We haven't seen it before. It also strongly suggests it was shot in the tribal areas along the Afghan-Pakistan border.
On the tape, too, grainy nighttime pictures of what Al Jazeera says is a nighttime attack on a government building in Afghanistan, showing dead combatants and, glowing under the camera's infrared illumination, a man Al Jazeera identifies as Al-Qaeda Abu Layth al-Libi. If authentic, and we have no independent verification of that, the pictures raise the possibility US aims to deny Al-Qaeda the time and space to train in and around Afghanistan are failing. Intelligence experts believe Al-Qaeda is still actively recruiting.
The significance of this material is that the Al-Qaeda in the Afghan-Pakistan tribal areas feel sufficiently confident, as it were, to actually film some of their operations and film some of their training.
According to recently deployed US Marines, they've been involved in firefights with up to 100 anti-coalition forces at one time. And although US forces are bringing limited stability to the small areas where they operate, security experts inside Afghanistan say the countryside is far from secure. Nick Robertson, CNN, London.
President Bush is speaking. Live from the Pentagon this hour, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld briefing reporters. We've got it when it happens.
Also live this hour, Attorney General John Ashcroft expected to announce indictments over prisoner abuse in Afghanistan. We're on that one for you as well.
Nobody move, please. We are going back to the airport. Don't try to make any stupid moves.
Tapes of terror. The 9/11 Commission releases recordings of the hijackers as it recreates that fateful day.
Contact this aircraft has failed.
Your mission, intercept shadow, commit bullseye 100-158, 21,500 track west.
Do we have an engagement authority?
Rattler mark copies, flares are authorized.
Aircraft diverted. Contact failed.
Secret Service has been informed.
Could it happen again? An exclusive report. We're in depth on securing American skies since the 9/11 attacks. From the CNN Center in Atlanta, I'm Miles O'Brien.
And I'm Kira Phillips. This hour of CNN's Live From starts right now.
Utterly unprepared for an unprecedented challenge. That's the bottom line on a top-down, incredibly detailed analysis of September 11th, 2001, from 8 a.m. Eastern to 10:03 and 11 seconds, to be precise. It points to miscommunication, confusion, and indecision on the part of air traffic controllers, the military, and their overseers at the highest levels of government. CNN's Sean Caleb has more on the final day of the final public hearing of the independent 9/11 Commission. Sean?
And what a day it has been, indeed. Tense confusion, miscommunication, inaction, and at times wildly inaccurate information. The 9/11 Commission said all combined, it showed that the U.S. military and its civilian officials were simply unprepared to deal with hijackers who had seized commercial airliners to turn them into missiles. For those who lost loved ones in the attacks on New York and Washington, at times this final public hearing stirred emotions. For the first time, the public heard detailed audio tapes involving cockpit transmissions by some of the hijackers, including this exchange. It came from Flight 11 before it slammed into the World Trade Center. It's believed to be the voice of lead hijacker Mohammed Atta.
Nobody move. Everything will be okay. If you try to make any move, you'll danger yourself and the airplane. Just stay quiet.
The hearing also detailed the crooked and jagged flight paths of the doomed airliners. This as officials scrambled to track information about the planes. Now, all of this highlights how U.S. air defense commanders and aviation officials were unprepared in, quote, every respect to stop the Al-Qaeda attacks that claimed nearly 3,000 lives. At one point, a senior FAA official directs Air Force fighters to chase American Flight 11. However, that plane had already crashed into the Trade Center tower. And NORAD, the North American Aerospace Command, was not notified of the hijacking of Flight 175 until after it hit the South Tower. Similar problems were noted with Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon.
On the morning of 9/11, it became clear that the historical procedures, the protocols, and the communication links were not adequate. The FAA and other agencies were reacting to a scenario that had not been practiced or modeled. Decision makers, including myself, were reacting quickly and, in my opinion, professionally, but in an untested environment.
Untested indeed. The report also said that President Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney acted quickly to authorize fighter jets to shoot down any plane that appeared hostile, targeting the White House or the U.S. Capitol. However, by then, the last of the 4 hijacked planes had already crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. Miles?
Sean Caleb's in Washington, thanks much. The head of NORAD says if the same horrific scenario were to happen again, military commanders would have as much as 17 minutes of reaction time, and fighter jets would be in firing range for 8 of those. Clearly, a lot more than airport security has changed in the past 2 years and 9 months, so we hope. Retired Air Force Major General and now CNN analyst Don Shepard joining us with some insights on the military capabilities then and now. General Shepard, good to have you back with us.
My pleasure, Miles.
Let's not belabor too much the situation before 9/11, because I want to talk about how things have changed. But on that morning, the ability to intercept aircraft of any kind was very limited in the United States, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was simply, in reality, not there, Miles. We had 7 alert sites, 14 airplanes protecting the entire United States, 2 in the Northeast, 1 up in Massachusetts, 1 down in Virginia, nothing in place, and no scenarios practiced. Nobody envisioned this type of scenario. We simply weren't prepared at all for this, Miles.
All right, so you can go through step by step, time frame by time frame. Bottom line is, nobody expected this. Nobody was prepared for it. We were still really thinking post-Cold War and really had not anticipated this. Let's talk about what's going on right now. Clearly, we have more planes on alert. I assume that number is a classified number. Can you give us a sense of how much more protection there is right now?
Well, again, the morning of the attack, we had 14 airplanes on alert. There are considerably more on alert, and it is classified. My guess is in the upwards of 40 airplanes on alert, but it does cost a lot of money, and the entire United States is not covered all the time. What we have is the ability, based upon notice, to come up rapidly in many locations, and we also have roving caps over the important population centers of the United States, but it's not covered all the time.
And when you say cap, let's define that for folks. Combat Air Patrol, which means essentially fighters kind of orbiting overhead on standby, being refueled as they go, watching out. That, of course, happened quite a bit right after 9/11, and especially up and down the East Coast. Today, that is happening sporadically, is not announced, correct?
That's correct. It's rotated on a regular basis. It's rotated. Also, the alert sites are rotated. They come up and they go down. We have the ability to rapidly enforce those alert sites. The key to all of this, of course, is the ability to put airplanes up over cities. That's not the key to our safety. It's one part of it, but we do have the ability, if alerts are given in the proper amount of time, and if we have the cues to know that airplanes are being hijacked, we do have the ability to put people in place much better than we did on 9/11, but not perfect, Miles.
All right, so when we talk now about more alert sites, we're still not anywhere near the numbers of fighters that were on standby in the absolute darkest days of the Cold War, the 60s, for example. Do we need to ramp this up?
No, we don't. In the 60s, of course, when we had the Soviet air threat, we were worried about air attacks on America by bombers. We had about 2,500 airplanes in air defense. Again, on the morning of 9/11, we had really 4 dedicated air defense alert sites. That's 60 airplanes, down from 2,500. Others that could be called upon, but it took some time to do that. We don't need that kind of air defense posture. What we are postured against now is, again, these terrorist type attacks. And again, it's not perfect. It's better, but it's not perfect. Still, things could happen, Miles.
All right. Right now, you say we have a quicker response. Why do we have? How much quicker? Why is it quicker? And is it based on some of the false alarms we've seen over the past couple of years? Is it working?
It is quicker in that we have more alert sites. Many more than the 7 that we originally had. And again, if something happens in the vicinity of these alert sites, we can get them airborne. We've practiced the scenarios. The pilots have been trained, so we're all on alert for this type of thing. So indeed, we can put airplanes in the air quicker. I want to stress one more time that the safety of Americans is not basically there by putting fighters up to shoot down Americans on American airliners. That isn't quite the safety, but we are able to put airplanes up to keep airplanes from impacting if the right things happen at the right time, in the right place, and notice is given.
You have told me often about the so-called fog of war, and watching what I watched this morning, that's what I thought of. The miscommunications, the misunderstanding, the confusion. To what extent can you guarantee there's better communication, I should say, between all these agencies that would have to respond so quickly in order to thwart something like this?
Well, I think it's better because we're being told by 9/11 Commission and others that they have practiced this scenario. So we're now looking inward, whereas before we were always looking outward. So again, it's clearly better, and we've thought through this problem. But it can happen again. If I were the hijackers, I wouldn't try again against the U.S. air transportation system. I would take other means in other areas.
All right. Major General Don Shepard, retired U.S. Air Force. Always a pleasure having you join us. We appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Kira.
What really happened on September 11th? What did the FAA know about the hijacked aircraft? What was the military ordered to do? For the first time since 9/11, we're hearing the bone-chilling radio comms and testimony of what went wrong that fateful day. But within the heart-wrenching mistakes also comes massive improvements in air security. I had the chance to fly with the pilots who have now taken on a new operation, exclusive access to a training mission that shows you if a commercial plane is hijacked, not only will military jets intercept it, but if thousands of lives are at stake, the call to shoot that plane down may come. An extremely difficult decision that now comes with extremely detailed training.
Aircraft diverted.
Secret Service has been informed.
They call it the air war against terrorists. And this is the battlefield. The potential enemy, a civilian aircraft under terrorist control.
Things get serious.
The strategy? To end every incident without firing a shot.
Oh my God!
But 9/11 spawned a new kind of war with chilling new rules of engagement. In this war, the military is forced to think the unthinkable.
I don't think the public would have stood for anything, us firing on commercial airliners in the past, but it's been proven that, yes, something worse might happen. So we're just kind of an extension of the public will.
Lieutenant Colonel T.G. Carrazas and Major John Black of the 125th Fighter Wing are getting ready for a routine patrol in southeast U.S. airspace. These Florida Air National Guard F-15 fighter pilots are battle ready.
Check the back end of the gun. Make sure it's all hot. The bullets are loaded in the chambers. Take our heat seeker, make sure that all looks good.
We're going along on a mission that shows what might happen if a commercial airliner is hijacked.
Rattler 1 copies, type and tail.
It doesn't take long before this mission is diverted.
Contact this aircraft has failed. FAA, can you give me a mode 3 on that?
5012, Jamie.
Something is not right with a passenger plane over the Atlantic Ocean.
Break. This is a Konar Battle Commander. We have a Nordo airliner.
Nordo, no radio contact.
Your Nordo aircraft is Falcon Airlines 401, Miami to Wilmington. It's a Metroliner.
Military intelligence and the FAA want to know everything about this airliner.
Get the range, how far they think it flying 3,400 pounds of gas.
Could this aircraft reach critical infrastructure?
He is deviating from his flight path.
These commanders take no chances.
This time, we have committed Rattler 01, flight of 2 out of the Jaguar cap.
Your mission, intercept shadow, commit bullseye 100-158, 21,500 track west.
Okay, we're tasked now.
Fighters now monitor Falcon Flight 401's every move. Then,
The aircraft is now squawking at 7,500 squawk.
7,500 is the code for hijack.
A change of mission for the fighters to be an intercept.
See if they can give us any indication of who's in control of the aircraft.
Pilots attempt hand signals. No response. Pilots rock their wings. Still no response.
He should have acknowledged with the ring rock, which he's not doing.
2 generals are brought in and briefed. one from the Canadian Air Force, one from the United States.
Souls on board?
16, 14 passengers, 2 crew, 1 Pakistani, 1 Saudi, 1 French. The others are presumed to be of United States descent. Fighters are on it now.
My concern is we could have something else in this country, so we're going to keep our focus on this thing, but we're also going to keep focus on the rest of the country.
The JPAC has authorized the use of flares to get the pilot's attention.
Now is the final attempt to get this pilot to respond. If he doesn't, the order could come to shoot this aircraft down.
Do we have an engagement authority?
Yes, sir, we have engagement authority online.
Rattler 1 copies, flares are authorized.
Flares are released.
Now the guy realizes he's serious. Now he's coming left following the Eagle.
The pilot finally responds.
I don't think we should ever relax, and we're going to have to continue to prosecute this enemy until they no longer present a threat.
A new kind of war, a new way of fighting, a battle in which a commander's best choice may be the lesser of 2 evils. And the battle cry is, never again.
Now, the man who commands pilots that may have to be in that position to fire. Colonel Jim Firth is the Florida Air National Guard's 125th Fighter Wing Commander. He's also a pilot for a major airline. He joins us live from Jacksonville, Florida. Sir, it's nice to have you with us. Colonel, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, very good. We're going to begin the interview as we are standing by, actually, for Attorney General John
Very good.
Ashcroft. Okay, so we might have to break away, but we will come back to you. That piece that obviously we just aired, you and I worked together on that. I learned a lot about this operation. We've heard a lot about what went wrong with regard to 9/11 today in the hearing. Let's talk about what has been done now to change the communication process and the real-time relationships and how the U.S. military is going forward and making sure that that never